Good afternoon, everyone. Give another couple of seconds here for people to join in. Just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm Paul Darsh, the Director of Marketing here at John Brooks. Our entire team here hope that you, your family, your friends are all safe and healthy and remain that way. And that if you or anyone you know are not feeling well, that your recovery is speedy and complete. Today's talk is on challenges and options when designing a small potable water system. And today's presenter is ANITA GUPTA. ANITA is the business manager for our filtration division here at John Brooks, and she has over 20 years of experience and involvement with filtration technologies in water and wastewater applications. A little housekeeping before we begin. Your mics will be muted by default for the duration of the presentation. Please use the Q&A icon on the Zoom meeting control bar on your screen to submit any questions you might have. ANITA will be presenting for roughly about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll address any questions that come up in the Q&A window. We want to respect your time commitment and the 1 hour schedule, so if there are any questions still left unanswered after the 1 hour, ANITA will address them in a follow-up email to the audience. The presentation will be recorded and a link to the presentation will be sent to you as well. Again, thank you for attending, and with that, I will turn things over to ANITA. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining this seminar. I hope it will be useful for what you're here to listen to or get the information on. Looking at some of the attendees, some of you I have met in person and presented something like that in person. So I have to admit, this is a bit unusual. This is my first time sitting in my living room doing this talk. But we'll see how that will go. And I hope everybody is staying safe wherever you are listening from, where you're calling from. So let's get to this. We will be talking about, so this presentation mainly will be focusing on what are the different options out there when we are involved in designing a small drinking water system. And I assume all the listeners, all the attendees on call are some ways are involved in either using the system or designing the system or operating the system, or some way or the other, this topic interests you. That's all. That's why you're on the call. When we use the word drinking water, it's synonymous with drinking water, potable water, domestic water. I must clarify that the intention of this presentation is not to talk about any legislative laws or the guidelines or drinking water treatment. If anything that's included in this presentation is the guidelines on drinking water treatment take precedence on that. Okay, so let's move on to that. The agenda will be, we'll briefly go over what are different type of water systems, then what are different type of water sources, and in those sources, what are different contaminants. And mainly we will be focusing on treatment for groundwater under the direct influence and surface water. And within that, we'll talk about what is a multi-barrier approach to safe drinking water. And what is a treatment approach, which is very commonly used. It's called 4-3-2-1 approach. We will see briefly into it. And this long word LT2ESWTR, which I could remember the full form, long-term to enhanced surface water treatment rule. Canada has adopted that from EPA, US EPA guidelines. And then of course, we'll talk about what challenges we run into when we're designing a small drinking water system. And at the end, as Paul promised, there will be question and answers. Now let's get into the basics. This probably takes you to elementary school. Water. Where do we get the water from? Surface water, groundwater. Groundwater is really down the water table. Okay, seems simple so far. Most of the drinking water supply that we get and it get treated. Just about 65% of public water systems comes from surface water. The groundwater is about 36%. Surface water is, that is in your river, stream, lakes, and that it's pumped to the treatment plant. Now, looking at the type of water systems. Now, this definition of water system could be different depending on what municipality, what jurisdiction you are in, but following are the broad category of different water system based on size. And this is the definition by our federal government or First Nations community. A large system is a system that serves over 5,000 people, so it's a large city. A small system is about 500 to 5,000 people. That's called a small system. Very small system when you're looking 26 to 500 people, and then 25 or less people, microsystem. Irrespective of the size of the system, the water quality expectations are same. Safe drinking water quality. Sorry about that. Somebody started calling me. I'm going to turn off my phone. My apologies. Moving on. And now, water system size. What are different water sources? Although this presentation is mainly focusing on the surface water or groundwater under the direct influence, but let's look at what are different water sources. Groundwater, of course, the water that is underground. And when we're taking a well water, treating groundwater, we run into different type of challenges. Surface water, the water that is on the surface, that's in our lakes, rivers, ponds, that's surface water. And how do we get surface water? From precipitations or the ocean runoff, from evaporations. That's how the surface water gets to the surface. And what is surface water and GUDI? As the full form of GUDI is the groundwater under the direct influence of surface water. I would say up to 5-10 years ago, we had a lot of wells in Western Canada and some in Eastern Canada as well. When you take the well water, there's not any requirement or there was no treatment done, and it was supplied just after a bit of disinfection. And then we start noticing that it was causing some health issues, the treatment wasn't enough. So there's a new acronym, or the new term was groundwater under the direct influence. So a groundwater that has an influence of surface water will have some characteristics of surface water as well as groundwater. So let's take a look at it. What are those contaminants in there? A raw water and a groundwater under the direct influence. So what will be a typical water analysis? Or I should say what you should be looking for, what we will be looking for when we are designing a small treatment plant using surface water. We will be looking at what's the incoming turbidity is, what's the total suspended solids, TSS load is. We know that if it's truly a surface water, dissolved solids will be relatively less, about 300 to 1,000 parts per million, because the dissolved solids are pretty high in groundwater, in well water. That's where you get the high calcium, high, the water hardness. That gives you all those dissolves, high chlorides, high sodiums. That causes your dissolved solids. Same way in surface water, the hardness will be moderate hardness and low level of iron and manganese. We know that iron and manganese issue is more in the well water, in the groundwater. The biggest issue with any surface water is going to be high organic content. Total organic carbon, TOC. Dissolved organic carbon, that's one of the biggest challenge that we run with when your water intake source is the surface water. And now what are the challenges with the GUDI water, which is a groundwater under the direct influence? The TSS level will be relatively low. because you're mainly getting the water from ground. However, since it's under the influence of surface water, we may run into high pathogens. That means high protozoans, those crypto and giardias, high bacteria content, high viruses. That's why the guidelines are becoming more strict. The guidelines that applies to surface water are also applying to GUDI water. What are the problems? If all these issues are not taken care of, it will cause scaling in the pipe if you have high TDS, total dissolved solid. Odor, you think that you're getting well water, but it's actually a GUDI water. And also, there will be microbial issues, high pathogen content. Now, we keep talking about water pathogens and having, this is we've been talking about coronavirus, which is one type of pathogen, which is in our air. But there are pathogens found in the water that could get into our body, the water that we're drinking. So before we get into the how do we inactivate those, how do we remove it? So let's have a little bit of basic understanding on what are these common pathogens will be found in water. You can categorize them in three main categories. For some of you, this might take you back to the biology class, high school biology. So the protozoans, you can divide them under protozoans, bacteria, or viruses. Protozoans are complete cells, right? They're parasites. They are independent and they're complete cells. They have their own cell structure outside. And the two main protozoans that we worry about are Giardia and crypto. Giardia symptoms are very similar to cryptosporidium symptoms. If the water has Giardia or crypto, Giardia by itself is very asymptomatic infection, but it also could be symptomatic. Cryptosporidium is the illness is symptomatic. Bacteria, what are the bacteria what we have mainly concern with? Mainly the coliform bacteria, total coliform bacteria. Where do you find them? In the soil, in vegetation, and if you're using surface water, it will automatically get into the water stream. And another is fecal coliform found in the intestine of mammals, basically. When I say mammals, in animals, in human beings, of course. And that will get into municipal wastewater, which gets into the water stream, surface water, and then it gets into the water that is being treated to convert into drinking water, right? So that's what we need to be concerned about. Viruses. Viruses are extremely small microorganisms. And actually, there's a debate among biologists. It's not even an organism, it's actually molecules. And that molecule is DNA or RNA. Most water viruses are DNA. They have the deoxyribonucleic acid or ribonucleic acid. Either way, they need a host to become infectious. So once they find the host, which will what gets into the body, then it infects us. Okay? So we'll be talking a little bit more about these viruses and how they could, all these pathogens, how they can be deactivated, how they will be removed. Okay, so what are the symptoms of crypto and Giardia, which are protozoans? What are the symptoms if the infection is because of the coliform, and the symptoms of viruses? Now, crypto and Giardia, very similar symptoms. Get nausea, diarrhea, low-grade fever, uneasiness. Coliform, again, the diarrhea, abdominal cramp. These are very typical symptoms. Same thing with viruses. If the viruses are not removed, they get into our digestive system, in our intestine. It could cause gastrointestinal illness. And in serious cases, it will actually cause diseases like meningitis and polio. Right? Now, getting to the how we're making the safe water. Before we get into the treatment, let's look at the water safety approach, which is adapted across North America, and actually World Health Organizations also recommend this approach. And it's called the multi-barrier approach. What is a multi-barrier approach? It's not just that treatment has to be robust. We need to first protect the water source. If we have picked that, this Lake Ontario or the Columbia River in BC or somewhere where we're taking the water, it needs, we have to protect that. We can't make it continuously adding more contaminant in it. That means your water quality will keep changing. And then important, of course, the robust water treatment system design is important. At the same time, in multi-barrier approach, it's important that we do a continuous inspection step, right? That means we need to continue to inspect. That is the turbidity level that's coming out, is the turbidity level that is good for human consumption. All the viruses and bacteria, is that up to the level, what's called the quality of the drinking water. And a continuous testing is important. A distribution system has to be robust. There are guidelines for how much of the residual chlorine or disinfectant needs to be there. So a multi-barrier approach is another guideline to make sure we design a robust water treatment system and maintain it. Again, just the same thing what I talked about in the previous slide is we need to protect the source. We need to design a robust water treatment system. I have to secure the good water supply network, a monitoring program in terms of the water quality so that it can be adjusted, right? And also be always prepared for if some adverse conditions comes up. This big word again, and I forget what's the full form of that is again, long-term safe water treatment strategies. This has been adopted from EPA guidelines. What is it? This was adapted to give guidelines for pathogen reduction. So which pathogens? Mainly for, it addresses the health effect that Cryptosporidium in surface water system when it's used for drinking water. So the guidelines are, before we say, okay, this water is good for treatment, or what type of treatment needs to be advised, we need to collect the water sample, right? We need to test it for crypto. We need to test it for E. coli, and then design a disinfection and the treatment system to make sure it meets the benchmark. Canadian Drinking Water Agency adopt this guidelines, and I would say most municipalities across Canada, we go by these strategies. Now get to the treatment side of it, surface water and groundwater under the direct influence, of course. Why are we doing water treatment? We're doing the water treatment to make it suitable for human consumption, right? To remove or deactivate all those contaminants which are undesirable, right? And I just see that we as human beings in North America, we consume a lot of water per day, right? So the demand for potable water, drinking water is always there. Now, what's the best approach to treatment? So it's like a formula, you can consider it. 4-3-2-1-0 formula. If you use it, think about it, when we're thinking of designing a potable water system. What does 4 means, right? So the 4, that means there should be viruses needs to be reduced or deactivated down to 99.9% reduction. Whatever viruses you expect to get, or what are the viruses come into the surface water, by the time this water is called drinking water, it should have 99.99% reduction of viruses. That will give a 4 log reduction or 4 log credit. Crypto and Giardia down to 3 log credit. And a system, 2 means a system should have 2 treatments minimum. When I say treatment, one treatment can be filter, other treatment can be chlorine. Right? And the turbidity of the treated water, filtered water, the water that you're calling a potable water has to have less than 1 NTU turbidity. When it comes to coliform, zero, absolutely no coliform should be there. Remember, coliform has the bacteria. Viruses are smallest microorganisms or molecules, and the crypto and Giardia are protozoans. Now, what are the different approaches? How can you get 4-log reduction in there? You can get the 4-log reduction by using filtration and disinfection. All right, the filtration, there are guidelines. You know, the filter needs to be NSF 61 or NSF 53 if it's point of use. The filter should have a log credit certification to it. A filter can be a cartridge type filters. A filter could be multimedia sand filters. A filter can be ultrafiltration. Okay? And when it comes to disinfection, you could use chlorination, UV, or chlorination and UV. You know, we'll go a little bit more detail in a couple next slides. And there are guidelines on what needs to be the residual chlorine level and for how long this residual has to be there. Same thing about, you know, 3-log reductions for Giardia and crypto. You could achieve that by disinfection and as well as filtration. 2 treatment barriers, simple. 1, NTU turbidity. Barrier filters. Filter is the only, I would say, foolproof way to make sure the turbidity is less than 1, unless the water coming in is already has less than 1 NTU, which is very rare if you're using surface water from lake, river, pond, or groundwater. Now, we can use filters, we can use disinfections. What challenges do we run into when we're designing? Many challenges, right? Very first one is source water quality data challenge. You know, we have a river water coming in. Do we have a reliable water quality? Do we exactly know what TSS, total suspended solids, or turbidity will be there throughout the year? We know that it's going to change depending on rain, the time of the year, same thing, how much TOC is going to be there. All that, you know, data needs to be very reliable. That's what's important, to do the testing multiple times in a year. But at the end, we need to meet the treated water guidelines. That means the turbidity needs to be 1, less than 1. And then the existing treatment, if any, the TOC need to bring it down to 3 to 5. Color needs to bring it down to 3 to 5 ppm. And if it's a groundwater under the influence, we got to make sure that iron and manganese is brought down to iron down 0.3 ppm or less, manganese 0.05 ppm or less. Before we get into the barrier filters and all that, since we're talking about surface water or groundwater under the influences, let's look at the pre-treatment. If you have a high TOC, we need to do the pre-treatment, because otherwise it's going to cause a havoc to the downstream treatment for filters and disinfections. TOC, organic carbons, or slime-producing bacteria are common issues that you get into upstreams. And there are, you know, chlorination and different enhanced coagulation, flocculations are the different ways to do it. We got to be very careful if we are adding chlorine in the presence of TOC. If the TOC organic is not taken care of, the chlorine will react with this organic and produce called disinfectant byproduct such as trihalomethane, which are cancerous. So all that needs to be thought about and taken care of before we get into the filtration and final disinfection. Other type of pre-treatment or pre-filtration need is you know, some coarse filter you might want to put so that your final barrier filter that is going to give you less than 1 NTU is protected, and you're not constantly changing your filter media, filter cartridges, or membranes. Now, final barrier filters. Final barrier filters, especially when it comes to small treatment plants. It could be a cartridge, or it could be membranes. It could also be some pressurized sand filters, multimedia filters. But the bottom line is this filter should be able to give us less than 1 NTU of turbidity. So the guidelines, what it says, your filter needs to be 1 micron absolute. More importantly, it's important that the filter is 1 micron absolute and membrane filters. The difference between a regular 1 micron absolute filters and membrane is the membranes have the credit for microbial reduction, and just regular 1 micron absolute filter is that it is certified only for particles reductions. So just a minor difference in there. When it comes to water filtration, drinking water, I would say I would stick more with the 1 micron membrane filters. But if the further, like even finer filtrations, is the ultrafiltration membranes. But at the end, it needs to meet NSF 6153 certification. Cartridge type filters. There are so many different cartridge type filters. But when we're designing a system using cartridge type filters, we're going to be just aware of that, what type of challenges we may run into, what are the limitations of cartridge type filters. We know that it's going to get plugged. When it's going to get plugged, once it's all full with all the dirt, we need to change it, throw it out, and put a new one. That could be challenging, you know, depending on who's operating the plant. What are the plant requirements, right? And also, all cartridges, filters don't have the log credit. You may not get any credit for reduction of crypto and Giardia or any viruses or bacteria. These are some examples of cartridges which are out there, which have some log credit associated with this. 3M Life Assure BLA model, 0.2 grade has the log credit associated. And same way, they have 1 micron high flow cartridges, which is NSF 61 certified. However, it does not have any log credit associated with it. Just that option is out there. Ultrafilter, which is becoming a lot more common even in small drinking water plants. Ultrafilters could be as small as a wall-mounted unit, or could be a small, you know, compact package systems. If you look at the chart on the right top corner, ultrafilter finds really, it falls at 0.0 micron removal. That means it's going to remove a lot of your viruses, a lot of smallest microorganisms, you know, parasites, bacteria, crypto, and Giardia. So, you know, it's a very, very good filter. Your turbidity coming out will be definitely less than 1 MTU after that, right? There is a separate seminar can be done on how to design a system with ultrafiltration system. And of course, we don't have a time today to talk about that. But, you know, next time, if anybody's interested, I'll be more than happy to talk about it. Now, we've been talking about the credits and log removals and all that. There are guidelines that the Canadian Drinking Water Guidelines gives that if you're using a conventional treatment using coagulation, flocculations, and then filtration, you get the 3 log credit for Cryptosporidium, 3 for Giardia, but only for 2. And if you remember, we need to get to 4 log credit for viruses. 3 for crypto and Giardia. So, you know, this list, if you look at it, you know, with ultrafiltration, we get 3+ for crypto, 3+ for Giardia. If pre-coagulated, you get 0, you get 1. Otherwise, you know, you gotta have some other disinfection to make sure you get virus removal with that. Just going back to this LT2ESWTR strategy, because LT2ESWTR strategy takes care of giving it, assigning the log credit to certain type of filters. A filter manufacturer can also get the log credit associated with their membrane, their cartridges, by doing a third-party demonstration pilot test. Actually, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, we were working with a campsite small water treatment package where they, you know, we use BLA series 1 micron membrane cartridges and get the third party testing done and the log credit associated with that. So it is possible. Now, so this was about the designing of barrier filters. You know, you could use membrane, you could use cartridges, and now disinfection system, because the filter system doesn't give you all 4 log credit. So let's look at, you know, what disinfection system. There are a couple of different types of disinfectant out there and have been talked about. There are numbers of articles written on them. Very most commonly used one across the world are chlorine, ozone, chloramine, chlorine dioxide, and UV radiation. Most popular one in Canada are chlorine and UV. Ozone is becoming you know, more popular. It's very effective, but at the same time, they all have some challenges and limitations and advantages in terms of the retention time and residual time. Chlorine is supposed to be a little bit more safer, so that I show that in the next slide there. If you look at the chlorine, it's good for equipment reliability. You know, safety concern is relatively low because we could use hypochlorite, which is pretty much your common bleach. And chlorine is actually very effective for virus, you know, for virus reduction as well. Okay? But it doesn't mean that we can't use other ones. Mostly what I have seen personally in Canada is a combination of 2 disinfectants, UV and chlorine. Large treatment plants, they have their on-site production of chlorine dioxide or chlorine. But two disinfectants are very common. So if you're using UV, then chlorine becomes your secondary disinfection. When you're designing this, so first we need to figure out, are we using UV or chlorination or both or something else? Let's say we're using chlorination at some point, right? Remember, you know, a few slides back, we need to make sure that TOC has been taken care of upstream of it. If it hasn't been and TOC has reached at the end, we may run into production of trihalomethane, which is a disinfection byproduct. And also, when we're designing the chlorination system, we need to be careful how we're designing the contact time, what concentration of hypochlorite chlorine we're using. So that's, you know, somebody who has done this before need to be consulted about it. The other challenge we run into is using the chlorine is chlorine escape time. Chlorine escape or maintaining the residual chlorine. There are guidelines about 0.5 to 1 ppm of residual chlorine to call this water safe all the time. Actually, we had an issue with the plant where the plant was shut down over the weekend and somebody comes on Monday and there's no residual chlorine left in there. So, you know, there is a way around it. You know, we need to have a recirc pump going so that the chlorine is recirculated all the time. UV disinfection. UV is, remember again, go back to high school physics, is UV spectrum is it's higher in frequency than visible light and lower than the X-ray. Its wavelength has a larger wavelength. So UV radiation, it actually alters the DNA of microorganisms. It can alter the DNA of crypto and Giardia and bacteria and even viruses. So that's why UV is very effective in deactivating. It's deactivating, it's not killing. Filter is removing and UV is deactivating it. Same is with chlorination. How effective is UV? Again, similar to chlorination. It depends on the exposure time and how much is the intensity. So mg, millijoules seconds per square centimeter is the unit of measure for determining how much of the strength do you need to expose to. So this table, let's say we don't need to go over the detail on that, but just if you look at it, if we need a 4 log credit for virus removal, we need to subject it to 186, right? CT factor, chlorine inclination. CT, as I mentioned earlier, is a measure of disinfection process and reaction time. It's the concentration of chlorine and how long it's in contact with that. And we go back by once we know how much of a free chlorine do we want or residual chlorine do we want in the water, and the back calculations are done and the retention time is figured out. And after that, we figure out how big needs to be our contact tank, or what's the design needs to be. And I say that's itself is a topic in itself to figure out how to design a contact tank for chlorine disinfection. There are guidelines, and they are available everywhere in the water manual and the EPA manuals. Chlorine, how much of the concentration of chlorine is needed, how long the contact time needs to be, it varies by the pH and temperature. So this is an example of, let's say, 15 degrees Celsius. If we are deactivating Giardia cyst and we need at a pH of 7, a 3 log credit, and if our chlorine concentration is 2, we need CT value of 83. So, I mean, these tables are pretty simple, easy to understand, and that's this helped them in designing our chlorine disinfection system. Same thing, the CT values are out there for deactivation of viruses. Going back to the formula of 43210, we know that we need to reduce the log activation to 4. Let's say it's a pH of 6 to 9, and we're operating at a temperature of 15, right? We need the CT value of 4. I don't know if I want to stop it without talking about the water disinfection and COVID-19 virus. I have to say that I'm not an expert in that. I've been reading like everybody else. It is pretty bad. It's a virus, it's an airborne. Can this get into our water stream? The answer so far by different research is yes, it could get into the water stream. But can this be deactivated by using the same method that we have been using before? So far, the answers that have been found is yes, it could be deactivated. We don't need to change anything. Has this been found in wastewater? At this point, not as much, because most of the patients are either in the hospital or in a particular area. The biggest difference between common waterborne viruses versus this virus is this is a single strand, just an RNA, versus the other viruses most of them are DNA. However, our regular chlorination will work for that so far. Again, the things might change because this is evolving every day. Before we go to the question answers, I just wanted to show you a couple of the packages and some of the challenges we ran into this. This is the package we had supplied, I think about 4 or 5 years ago for a hydro project. If you look at the different components in this one, these 2 green bodies at the bottom, they are 2 pre-filters, right? They are filtering, I believe it was down to 100 or 150 micron to get big chunks out. And these 2 shiny cylinders up there, they had the 1 micron membrane cartridges. This was able to bring our turbidity down to less than 1 NTU. And this green box on the right-hand corner is, right top corner is a UV. This has the UV bulb, UV disinfection, and after that there was chlorination in it. So the challenges we had, when we were working on this, because this plant was not running 24-hour, and when the water is left in the tank, there was chlorine escape was happening next day. Residual chlorine wasn't showing what we wanted it to be. Since this was surface water, there were some challenges of cartridges getting plugged too quickly because the water had some organics in there. And I believe, I don't know exactly, but I believe that we moved the chlorination system at the really front end of it so that we can take care of organic issues as well as taking care of the disinfection part. And not too long ago, we built a package for a First Nations community in Manitoba. This was for 50,000 liters per day, almost like 40 household. This shows a little bit complicated. This was shipped in 3 different skids. I'm going to actually show you the PNID on that. So this was surface water, and of course it met all 43210 requirement. We had surface water coming in using a pump. We went through a coarse screen, and then we went into sand filters. You know, this is a barrier filter. And then of course the next stage was cartridge filters. Why 5 micron, why not 1 micron? You know, this was done with what was more convenient for the customer, because at the end, if you look at it, we did put 0.6 micron, because to meet 4310 requirement, the cartridge or a filter needs to be finer than 1 micron absolute. That way. So we had the pre-filtration, we had the barrier filter here, we had first stage of disinfection, which was UV, and also the chlorination as the secondary disinfection at the contact tank, right? And then of course, then it gets into the distribution system. This is up and running there. So this pretty much summarizes it. Before I open the polls for question and answer, I just wanted to summarize it that when we're working with the potable water system, when we get into designing a potable water system, the most important point that we need to consider is, yes, it's important to meet the water quality guidelines. However, the system needs to be robust. Multi-barrier approach we need to use. System needs to be able to deal with the variable. System needs to be able to, you know, take care of unexpected operating situations. That's really important. And also, we need to take into account what are the different treatment situations or treatment technologies out there. Can we use cartridges? Can we use membranes? If we're using the membranes, we need to make sure that we consult with the individuals, with the company, with the organizations who have experience in designing it, because that could be really mind-boggling if it hasn't been done properly. So it's really important that we get those people involved in it, because all these guidelines and laws are made to protect, to educate us, to protect us, to tell us that the water quality is really, really important, because the potable water is the water that we're taking in our body. And we want to make sure that no unwanted pathogens get in there, and you know, all the water quality, the turbidity needs to be very low. Okay, so this ends our presentations, and I don't know, I'm gonna ask Paul too if we can open questions. Paul, do we have any? Oh, there is a yes, so there is actually one question here. It said, do you regularly test for non-coliform bacteria? If so, how do you handle a high non-coliform count when total and fecal coliform are? Sorry, let me read it again. Do you regularly test for non-coliform bacteria? If so, how do you handle a high non-coliform count when a total and fecal coliform? Well, to my understanding, if you have a high non-coliform, the concern with the guidelines are more directed toward coliform count. If your total and fecal coliform is 0, but I'm not exactly sure if the guidelines suggest that you should still test for non-coliform bacteria. However, the guidelines are you should regularly test for coliform bacteria. I don't know if that answers the questions. It was an anonymous attendee. So far, we have only one question. Either this presentation was too clear or very clear. If there are no more questions, as Paul has mentioned that we will be sending this, there will be a link to the presentation sent. Paul, can you please mute yourself for a minute? Yeah, so there will be a link sent to all the attendees, correct?
Correct. That's right.
Right, okay. And then, please feel free to contact myself directly. We'll be more than happy to send the questions there. Oh, there's one more. In the crypto and Giardia removal credit, what is considered slow for sand filtration? Okay, so slow sand filter is a type of sand filter. There are sand filters are pressurized sand filters and slow sand filters, where in the large municipal plants, they are the gravity fan. I don't know if that's answered the questions. So those are called the slow sand filters. Do they give the credit for the slow sand filters have crypto and Giardia removal credit? Yes, they do. Same as any media filters. Right, I guess that's, I don't see any other questions there, so I guess we will, the lines are still open for another, 13 minutes. Anybody has any more questions? Oh, there is a, I know this is an old one. I will, there are still participants. If Paul, I'm seeing more on the Q and some are coming on the chat and some are coming on Q&A. Can we look at the chat one as well?
Anita, there's another question in the Q&A.
Right, okay, so the person is saying that I'll be more specific. I had a non-coliform count result of 30,000 CFU per 100 ml, but both total and fecal coliform came back to 0. Is this concerning? Again, I will go back to the guidelines talk about total coliform, and as well as, the guidelines talk about total and fecal coliform, non-known coliform count. But since these are bacterias, right, and bacterias they have a certain size. At the end, if they're not considered pathogenic, they will create a, how do I put it? They will increase your turbidity. So they will become a nuisance for your filter. 30,000 CFU per 100 ml is pretty high. The coliform size of the bacteria are, they could range anywhere from 0.5 micron to 2 micron range. So yes, so 30,000 CFU per 100 ml will be high because it will plug the, it will be plugging your barrier filter. So from that perspective, we should be concerned. Oh, hold on. Am I getting the? No, there are no more questions there. Okay, we'll be still. We're still here. Anybody wants me to go back to any previous slide? I'd be more than happy to look at it. I know there was a lot of information. You might have the questions after the fact. You'll have our contacts. We're more than happy to answer that.
I think if there's no more questions, what we'll do is we'll wrap up the seminar, and we'll make sure that the video recording is sent to you, and certainly by all means reach out to ANITA and her team if you do have any follow-up questions. Again, thank you for participating today, and certainly wish everybody a happy and healthy long weekend.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll just end that. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe. Oh, there are a lot more Q&A now. Are we still here, Paul? If people are still here, so there are some more questions that just showed up. That was just a comment.